this is too much here. Stop this right now. I'm not going to have any more papers. All right. Let's see. I think we can go ahead and get started. Anyone who's come up, they can probably kind of catch up a little bit. So I'd like to call the Community Development Committee meeting to order. And the first thing on our agenda is invocation. We can bow our head for silence, please. Amen.
Amen.
And the second thing, do we have anyone from the public for public participation?
Yes, we do. We have 2 people currently. I have 2 people signed up. So how much time do you want to give them?
I'll give them 2 minutes.
All right. First up, we have Cashin Drolet. And if you're on phone, just press *6 to unmute.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Cashin Drolet with Historic Charleston Foundation. I wanted to comment on agenda item 3 and 4. Regarding item 3, we've been closely following the conversations in this committee by City Council on BAR Demo Purview north of Line Street. This district includes some really great neighborhoods whose architecture captures and tells important parts of Charleston's history and culture, worthy of celebration and preservation. At the same time, we recognize the ambiguity in the regulations and the confusions and frustrations that have ensued for homeowners living in this district. HCF supports BAR policy changes that would enhance accessibility for homeowners, alleviate confusion, provide flexibility in replacement materials, protects the most significant buildings, and preserve existing affordable housing for longtime Peninsula residents. We've been working with the planning department staff and our colleagues at the Preservation Society to accomplish these goals through this amended policy statement, and we look forward to continued work with you and the BAR, and our hope is to make these goals a reality very soon. Regarding height and architectural merit, agenda item 4, HCF is very supportive of the ordinance concerning height and merit. We look forward to participating in this overdue dialogue. Architectural merit was adopted in 2017 to incentivize developers to produce really great designs using high quality materials and to make meaningful contributions to the public realm. In practice, it has not achieved those intentions and the high level of architecture that Charleston deserves. We hear this from the community on a regular basis. We did a survey last year of BARL applications since 2017 and found that 11 of 13 properties who'd applied for architectural merit height got it. And the 2 that were denied are still working their way now through the BAR application process, and a few additional applications have been submitted, which are also pending. Given that the vast majority of projects gain the extra story, architectural merit has become viewed as an entitlement rather than something that must be earned. And certainly this was not the intent of the ordinance as envisioned. And I'd argue that architectural merit is really kind of a failed experiment. It's a nebulous concept that has produced confusion for applicants and the public and resulted in unfortunate litigation. There is a place for large-scale buildings in Charleston. Density on the peninsula and sorely needed additions to the housing stock can still be achieved without architectural merit. And the ordinance before you proposes sensible changes and much needed clarity, while also importantly incentivizing the creation of new affordable housing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Councilman Pell, you have any questions?
I don't, but since you called on me, I just wanted to say thank you to Cashin and everyone at HCF, as well as Brian Turner Preservation Society for their work on both of these issues and for talking to me and answering my questions. And it's great to have, y'all engaged in these very important discussions. And I appreciate y'all's open-mindedness to some of the concerns that Councilman Saccharine and I brought forward. And we appreciate the dialogue.
Thank you. Anyone
We're
else?
happy to do it. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, we can go on to the second person that we have online.
That will be Sam Spence.
Mr. Spence?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Good afternoon, Council, Chairman. My name is Sam Spence from the Preservation Society of Charleston. I too am registering comments today on the north of Line Street revisions and proposals to remove architectural merit from height district zoning code. Over the past several months, the Preservation Society has engaged with city staff, preservation colleagues, and the design community on the changes to BAR policies for north of Line Street. And we're pleased to see them now move forward for review and adoption. First, we believe these policy change objectives proposed for north of Line Street will substantially benefit homeowners, design professionals, and policymakers like y'all alike in the regulatory policy or in the regulatory process. Analysis by our team at the Preservation Society found that of BAR demolition purview application, BAR demolition requests of likely and sorry, shows, excuse me, analysis by our team shows disparities between likely investor-owned properties and individual homeowners when navigating the BAR demolition purview regulations. So for example, we looked at all the applications since 2017, that's 98 demolition requests in the area, and 66 of those were denied, with non-investors making up a disproportionate amount of those, about 70% of those denials. So when considering this policy, we strongly encourage the celebration of this area's unique history, culture, and architecture, like Cashin said, and other goals that we've been supportive of advancing through the policy include allowing the majority of homeowners greater flexibility for replacement features while also establishing protections for significant buildings, streamlining replacement approvals by allowing staff level review, providing clarity and transparency to a process that's been confusing for staff and applicants. And we're also supportive of the policies that seek to remove barriers for low income and long-term residents to maintain and improve their properties. This is just one thing the city can do to kind of forestall population shifts by long-time residents away from the city's traditionally diverse urban core. Again, we're happy to be partners in this to help facilitate the application of these new rules and make sure they're transparent and understandable for folks north of Line. On architectural merit, I'll refer you to our President and CEO's op-ed in Tuesday's Post-and-Courier on the issue. I think many of you have seen it. He spoke to y'all also on Tuesday at Council. But I'll just say the proposal is a needed and long overdue revision that reflects the modern reality of building in Charleston. Property owners are going to seek to build taller and larger, and it's the government's responsibility to set a predictable process forward. Eliminating the discretion of BAR to grant height is a critical step to do that. The requests for waivers, like Cashin said, based on height or based on architectural merit have become so commonplace that it's almost a default for many developers. And worse, the provision has tied up many of these folks in expensive litigation that's a waste of taxpayer money also. So we urge your support for the change to height districts and stand ready to work as partners. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions from the committee? Well, I'd like to thank you all for participating. And we're going to look at all this very seriously, from north of Line Street, because we want to make sure we keep a diverse community that we have and giving everybody opportunity, if they can, even if sometime afford to fix these houses the way it is, if they have a demolition by neglect or whatever. We need to look at all these things very seriously, because we are in the city of Charleston, even the council members, we try to always hold on to diversity in the city, if you may, and not trying to have people eliminate their house because they can't do certain things to the home, and they had the homes probably 30 or 40 years or more, as myself with my house for 37 years on King Street. And then that would fall under the jurisdiction also. So we have to look at it very carefully, everything north of Line Street, because it's something new and something different for the homeowners. And so these are things that even the council is looking at very seriously, I think, that I have seen from my colleagues on council. Thank you very much for your participation.
Yeah, thanks. Glad to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, anything else before we move on? Okay, we'll move on to item B, approval of the minutes, July 21st, 2022. And I have a motion.
So moved.
Councilman Sacre? Still, Councilman,
I'll second that.
okay. Okay, it was moved in second. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposers, nay, ayes have it. And we don't have any old business, none, so we'll move on down to new business, item D. D1 is City of Charleston Department of Housing and Community Development, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Section 108, financing tools for the acquisition and development of affordable and workforce housing. PowerPoint presentation. Who's going to handle that, Ms. Tiana?
Yes, sir, I am. Good afternoon, Councilmember Mitchell, Saccharin, Appel, and Parker. Thank you for your service. We forwarded to you an attachment that we received from the Department of Housing and Urban Development regarding the 108 financing loan tool. Several months ago, Matt Ojala, who's a member of the team here at the Department of Housing and Community Development, shared with this committee information relative to the need we had for funding, for the long-term sustained funding to continue the work that we must do in the community. So what we are presenting to you today is one of the options that we would like to pursue to help address that funding need. That funding need, again, would help us to continue to both acquire property, construct property, and preserve property in the city of Charleston. And so, Patrick, can you pull my presentation up? I have just a few slides for the committee, and basically those slides are derived from the information we sent as an attachment.
Sure thing. Give me 1 second.
Okay. And I've shared screen successfully one time, and it hadn't happened since that time. So.
No. There we go. All right.
And Patrick, we can go past that. I guess I don't have control over that. So as I indicated, council members, the purpose for the 108 loan and why we need it is to facilitate the continued development of affordable and workforce housing in the city of Charleston through the following: acquisition, construction, and rehabilitation. And I will say to you all as a reminder, we do have funding sources on hand. Patrick, would you go to the next slide? As you all know, we have the fee in lieu funding that is available to us, and we basically have commitments, that's correct, against our fee in lieu dollars. We also have our franchise fee funding that we'll talk about briefly. And then we have the federal dollars that the Department of Housing and Urban Development awards us each year. Beyond those dollars, we don't have a dedicated source of funds by which to continue these efforts, hence our desire to secure a 108 loan. What I have for you on this particular slide is a sample of the projects that we have on the books, if you will, that we will implement hopefully over the next year or two. And now this is in addition to what you all approved relative to 67 America Street the other day. We acquired a site on Juniper Street in the West Ashley community approximately 4 years ago. Our goal is to build 10 for sale townhomes there. That project has been put out to bid. We anticipate the return of those bids at the end of this month. We are building, as I indicated, 10 townhomes, approximately 1,100 square feet. Those properties will be priced at, and again, these are estimates, $300 a square foot. We have on hand right now to help get those homes built $1,300,000. That funding is derived from our franchise fee dollars. So if those projects or if those townhomes come in at the anticipated price, we will have a $2 million gap that we will need to fill in order to facilitate that development. As you all know, the Heartland Group, which is associated with the Magnolia development, committed a Harriet Street site to the city of Charleston. They basically transferred that to us as part of their affordable housing commitment. Our design center has done a study by which we believe we can get 26 attached units at that site. With that, we are looking at approximately $270,000 per house for construction purposes. And right now, we have not allocated funding for that one yet. And I would say to the committee, we have put out a bid for an architect. We are waiting for the final transfer of that land, but what we're basically attempting to do is plan ahead for what we'd like to do. And this is another site that is available to us. On this site, there are 2 homes that we will have to eventually demolish, but right now we are awaiting the final transfer of that land. We also have available to us 3 what we call scattered site lots. 2 of those lots are on the east side and 1 is on the west side, 5 and 14 Porter's Court, and then 79 Cooper Street. These will be 3 for sale, single family detached homes. We bid these properties out back in 2019. The average cost to build each one of these was $366,000. And I would just say to the committee, we kind of put those on the shelf, if you will, because we felt strongly that those prices were too high. And one, they would not, the cost of them would be greater than what the individuals that we assist could afford. And we would have to subsidize it too heavily. So we are hoping to go back and rebid those later this year, early next year. But if we were looking at attempting to fund that, we have about $500,000 in CDBG program income, but at the prices illustrated here, we still would have a gap of about $598,000. Patrick, would you go to the next screen for me, please? So how much funding can we secure under the 108 loan? Wanted you to be aware of that. Based on the guidelines, the city could borrow up to 5 times its annual allocation of community development block grant dollars. We currently secure about $845,000 annually in CDBG. So that would equate to a loan of around $4.225 million. And the goal with repayment of those funds would be upon the sale of the for sale units, a portion of those funds, and we would certainly have to look at what those dollars equated to, would go towards paying that 108 loan off. If you go to the next screen for me, Patrick. The collateral requirements of the 108 loan, again, the current and future allocations of the community development block grant funds are the primary collateral. Naturally, full faith and credit of the city is another, and then a lien on property owned by the city of Charleston is also another collateral requirement under the 108 loan. Next slide. And I really just talked about this, various sources by which we could repay the 108 loan. I know that is of great consideration to the committee and to council. And so that is the process for repayment. And then next slide, Patrick. And so I would also mention to the committee, because I didn't put that on, there is interim financing at a variable interest rate that is based on the 3-month T-bill auction rate. And then there's a permanent financing rate, which is a competitive fixed interest rate that is available through HUD's public offering. We have begun conversations as we contemplated bringing this before the committee. We conducted an initial meeting with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Again, the information that we sent to you all as an attachment was derived from the meeting we held both with our local, and when I say local, Columbia, essentially HUD office and HUD headquarters. We met with our budget, finance, and revenue collections leadership to secure their feedback. Naturally, that'll be ongoing. We now wanted to present this option to you all today to get your support of it. Once we get a recommendation from the CD Committee of City Council, we will begin analyzing information related to the application itself. We will confer with the HUD offices again, and the goal would then be to submit an application to City Council, possibly the first meeting of October of this year, because it is an extensive application, of course, that we would have to complete. And I would say to the committee, the City of Charleston has facilitated and repaid one 108 loan approximately 5 years ago. That was for an amount of about $1 million. And we used it basically to acquire properties that we have since facilitated and redeveloped under our first-time home ownership program. And I believe that's my last slide. So I'm glad to answer any questions, Councilmember Mitchell, other members of the committee that you might have that I have put before you this afternoon.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Committee members, if you have any questions, I would like to say that we need to get this, if possibly, if we can acquire this. This is something that's very needed in Charleston. As you see, the amount and the cost of building in Charleston, I mean, it's going through not the roof, but it might be the ceiling and everything else. And it's probably reaching the sky right now for us to build anything here, even to say affordability. That terminology is, I don't know what's going to go by next year. It might go away, but it's very hard to build in the city of Charleston, as you can see, in the cost factor of what it costs. And if we don't have monies coming from somewhere else to help us to do this, it's going to be hard because the city can't do it. We can't do it alone. And I just applaud Ms. Johnson for trying to reach out with the 108 loan. I was working with that, and I was with HUD, and I think Councilman Gregory also. But it's something that if we can acquire, this would kind of help us. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it help us. And we also had properties. I remember when the property in the Magnolia project came forth, because I was working with them, the Magnolia project, and I was telling them that we need some housing in that particular area. And they came forth, and that's when how this particular property came forth from them at the time. Because I tell them it's nothing for me, but it's all about community and all about affordable housing that we need in the community. So this came about years ago with the property that they was going to transfer over to us. And I don't know how many cleanup in that area need to be done if the property have that at all. I don't know.
No,
you don't need any cleanup in that particular area. So that's a plus on that side of it, that it wouldn't be any cost factor on that portion of it. So that is a little background of it, since I was involved in that particular property when it was acquired and given over to the city when it was about to do the Magnolia development. Then it went under and it came back up. So now they're moving swiftly right now with the Magnolia project. So if anyone else have any questions, Councilman Appel, Councilman Sacrum. Okay, Councilman Sacrum.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question for Ms. Johnson. Thank you, Gianna, for all the efforts that you continue to push forward. I know it's, I feel like for me anyways, when we look at the numbers, extrapolated out over the next 10 years, what we need, I guess my two questions are, how doable is it for us as a city to accomplish that goal, number one? Number two, what is the role of the county in all this? And I guess number three, can you give us an update on the discussions happening at the county level around any additional revenue? Was it the bond? I think they were going to float a bond. So can you just update on that? I guess I'd like your opinion on how as a city are we going to accomplish the goal of 16,000 units? I think that's the number, right?
Well, I would just say, Councilmember Saccharin, those are excellent questions. And part of the reason Matt came forward with the numbers a few months ago, which we're glad to share again, was to give you all a good sense of what the need was and where we are in relation. We do have, or we're anticipating, additional funding from fee in lieu. However, I'm a former banker. I don't count the money until it's actually in the account. So I would just say we are looking forward to that, but unless we find a sustained source of funding in which to support affordable housing for the long term, it will be very difficult or nearly impossible to continue to do what we're doing right now. The bond, the general obligation bond that council and the residents of the city of Charleston approved back in 2017 was an excellent source. I know that comes with repayment obligations to the city, but I will just say the flexibility of that and the ability to leverage those dollars were critical. They don't come with the same requirements as our federal dollars, although our federal dollars have been great. So I have thrown that out to both council and I've thrown it out to our leadership at BFRC for us to possibly consider looking at another bond allocation for our community. And I would say to us, when we think about that bond, it leveraged $100 million. It was a $20 million bond. It leveraged $100 million, and we anticipate somewhere around 500 plus units. Naturally, that's all rental. Ideally, if we're able to do it again, I am hopeful that somehow we're able to include a for sale component in there. So I think we can do it, but Councilmember Saccharin, it takes funding and it takes partners to do it. I feel like we have a good partnership base. So if we can work in those realms with the partners, with the funding, with our improved processes within the city, that'll get us at least, halfway there. As it relates to Charleston County, they are not, as I understand it, moving that referendum forward. Their county council, and I see Councilmember Mitchell shaking his head, decided not to push that forward. The initial indications were that they did not have the plan that was promised that could show them how to strategically move that forward, and thus they are not. And so as far as Charleston County, we do not receive any direct support for affordable housing. I know that with their most recent ARPA allocation of about 20 million, they are looking at funding various projects. In fact, I know several groups that work in the city have requested funding from Charleston County to facilitate activities, West Ashley and other places. They are literally now waiting on responses from Charleston County on those requests. Thank you. And I see Matt, I don't know if Florence is on. Certainly, Matt, if you or Florence have anything to add to what I said for the council members, please feel free to do that.
Yeah, sure. Very briefly, it's going to require funding, but it's also going to require looking at our zoning, looking at expanding our incentive zoning across the city, expediting permitting for affordable developments. It's really an all of the above approach. And, we're referencing a $20 million bond that is creating upwards of 500 affordable units. We need 16,000 affordable units by 2030. You can kind of do the math in your head to understand what the scale is that we're talking about.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Chair,
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Councilman Saccharin, you have something? Okay.
sorry, one additional question, Chair. Thank you. So Gianna, you mentioned potentially having the city initiate that, put that on the ballot. Would that not make sense to be doing that? I mean, what does that process look like to get that done, and who ultimately drives that process? Is that council? Is that mayor? Is that
Council?
Well, it certainly starts with our CFO who's on having a conversation, but that is driven by bond council and then city council, because you take your direction from bond council. But bond council is conferring with our CFO to make sure, in fact, that the city understands that obligation and can meet that obligation. Then there's an approval process that you all institute, and then it is put out for the voters.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilman, so the last two bonds the bond that was issued, I was there when it was issued, and I got out along with my little campaign team I use when I usually run for re-election, and had them to go out to canvass the whole particular area in the peninsula to assist them in trying and letting them know what we was trying to do so far as affordable housing, and to vote on that bond issue. And that's how that bond issue really passed. They came out big time and passed both of them, because otherwise it wouldn't have been done, because the education part of it, you have to make sure that they understand what it was all about. And the first bond that we issued, I think it was $10 million. I think the people, they wasn't satisfied with that particular one. I think Councilman Pell might remember, he might have been on council at the time, but he remember people didn't like it because they said it was going to be for affordable housing. But I think the Housing Authority got most of that money. They purchased some things and it didn't go the way that we planned it. So the second bond, we made sure that it was handled a little differently, if you may. And that's how that came about. And Councilman Pell alluded to the same thing that Ms. Johnson was talking about so far as all these things that we need to happen. And he mentioned these things about zoning and planning and things like that. So those are some of the things that we have to look at very carefully. Even if this happens, how we have to look into it. And I applaud him for doing that, because he came up with this on council prior to this, what we're hearing about now. So these are some of the things. It's a very tough game out here now, and we have to look at it very seriously. Councilman Appel, do you have any questions?
I think we've reached the point where y'all are all saying the stuff that I want to say, and it's beautiful. I feel like I'm starting to kind of make some inroads here with some of this, and it's an all and above approach, as you said, Chairman Mitchell, and Gianna's doing a tremendous job in her department and everybody else in her department leveraging these dollars. But at the end of the day, it's a resource game, and you got to keep feeding it to have the output that we want. And I'm not looped into what's going on at county council, but it would seem to me to make sense that rather than county council try to replicate all of the knowledge and experience that Gianna has and all the experience we have doing affordable housing, they'd be a whole lot better off raising some revenue and sending it to the city. I mean, just to sort of fuel the furnace of our department over here. I mean, the county does certain things that the city of Charleston can't do, and vice versa. And I think most people would agree that, affordable housing makes a whole lot of sense downtown, next to employment centers, next to infrastructure, things of that nature. So it's not like, and that's where the need is. So I think I'd like to see a lot more, intergovernmental communication, coordination between the city, the county, maybe even the school district. I mean, at a certain point, affordable housing for teachers and things of that nature is going to become an issue because the region's really got some major challenges, and we're beginning to say a lot of the right things, and it's very encouraging for me to hear. And I look forward to being a part of that solution with everybody.
Yes, and I spoke with some of the county council members, that I know of. I know a couple of them, and when they was talking about this bond, I said, well, you all have never done it. If you get with the city of Charleston, we can kind of help you guide through it, because we have been doing it a long time. And they said, yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. That's what we might do. And when I heard again, didn't happen. So, because they also had this property on Morrison Drive that of that they own, you see, and then they had this dilemma what they was going to do with the Joseph Floyd Manor. So they got, so some things are going on, and I just hope that they come back with it. But I told them we could help with our community development office, that we were doing this all the time so far as affordable housing. If they're not aware of it, how it's being done, contact our office and we can kind of guide them through and work together in harmony and peace that way. And that's one thing they said. Well, a couple of county council members said, yes, that'd be a good idea, and to work with it. But then I don't know what happened after that, So that's where it stands, I think we would need a motion on this to send this to council.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it was moved in second. All in favor, vote by saying aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. So we'll move this on to city council for their approval. So we'll go on down to item number
Thank you.
2. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Item number 2, City of Charleston Department of Livability, vacant buildings update and PowerPoint presentation. That's Dan Riccio.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'll be giving a PowerPoint. Before I do that, I want to thank Councilman Saccharin for bringing this item of discussion to City Council. Since then, it's sparked dialogue and communications across some city departments, all who have some type of role with dealing with these vacants. I see a lot of positive outcomes coming, so that's a good thing. But I want to briefly go into what my department main duties are when dealing with vacants, and a little bit of what touch on some of the responsibilities of a couple of other departments. Okay, everybody's got that okay?
Yes, I see something.
Gotcha. Okay, so addressing vacant structures here in Charleston by my department, there you go. So basically, vacant structures. Currently, the Department of Livability and Tourism monitors approximately 200 vacant structures, with approximately 95% of those being historic in nature. In 2010, when we took over, there were approximately around 500 vacant structures, down to 200 to today. Livability officers are responsible for monitoring vacant structures and enforcing the minimum standards ordinance regarding property maintenance and preservation. So what we do, the officers basically ensure that structures are boarded, they're watertight, they're secured from public access. It shall be free of litter and overgrowth, graffiti, and derelict vehicles. And the property shall be posted with no trespassing signs to deter criminal activity. So a couple of approaches we take a criminal approach when we're dealing with these vacant houses to try to get some resolution to them. So basically, livability officers conduct inspections of the properties and they determine if a violation exists. And I'll tell you that it is a repetitive process trying to keep these vacants boarded and clean of litter and things of that nature. So the officers, they provide documentation to include photos. They obtain a violation notice and or obtain the information, and a violation notice is served to the owner, either in person or by certified mail. More by the mail with our difficulty in locating these individuals for the most part. If the property owner or agent is located, they're asked to rectify the deficiencies within 10 days of receipt of the violation notice. If the owner or agent fails to comply after the warning, a court summons is issued, and we obviously go to livability court. A couple of things happen there. The judge can order, and this is when they do not comply with what we ask them to do. Judge can order the owner or agent to rectify the deficiencies and face a fine, or the city can abate the nuisance and place a lien on the property after we hire someone to go on and take care of the deficiencies. Then we place that lien on the property, and it is then recouped at some point in time when the house obviously comes to some type of sale or other. So the civil aspect of it is, if we can't absolutely notify anyone, we've tried. What we have to do from that point is start civil proceedings. And what we do is notice of violations prepared by my department. We have to physically post this notice of violation on the residence in conspicuous plain view. At this point, we post this notice of violation in the Posting Courier for 12 consecutive publishings. After 10 days of the publishing, the owner agent has the right to appeal the notice of violation. Usually, if we don't hear anything after the 10 days and they don't respond to any of the violation notices, then we proceed with hiring a contractor to abate the nuisance and then place a lien. Now, normally what we do is for example, when the the structure is becoming compromised, our responsibility is basically trying to provide stabilization and boarding and make it watertight. So that's about as far as we can go with that. So that's the example I wanted to give. We want to try to mothball it as much as possible to keep intruders out, to keep crime out, and to obviously prevent it from deterring, for historic preservation purposes. So we have a lot of contributing factors to what we deal with. A lot of properties, they're deceased owners with no heirs whatsoever. We have non-probated estates that we have to deal with. It becomes difficult even with some estates locating the rightful heirs to those properties. We have our strict BAR requirements, both staff and the board. Financial constraints on both the property owners and heirs and the city. The court process slowing the progress. And what I mean by that, we have many cases already dealing with vacant properties in our court system now. The current ordinances that we go by, the 2154 statute, basically allows for a property owner to come into compliance, try to get the property either listed in probate or find the rightful heirs or try to sell the property or rehab the property. That takes time and it clogs the system up, and I'm going to get into one of our resolutions that we're going to help with that issue. And also demolition by neglect. How we look at demolition by neglect, people look at it as, we look at it as two ways. We look at the willful and the non-willful owners. Willful owners to me and our definition is those who can afford it, which are probably contractors that want to rehab the property and basically don't want to adhere to BAR standards and to rehab it. And the issue becomes worse to a point of demolition. And then the non-willful are those heirs to these properties that just don't have the money or resources to take care of it. So those are some pretty big obstacles that we have to deal with when we try to keep these properties mothballed and protected. So just kind of like in a little overview of what we do with livability, we try to maintain that fabric and preserve that fabric of the residents, keep it clean. And unfortunately, it'll spill over to a point of deterioration where the fire marshal kind of gets involved. They post the property with the big red X that people see around town. That's for the safety of their firefighters. It's telling their firefighters, do not enter that property. It's not structurally sound to fight that fire from the inside. And then unfortunately, if it deteriorates even further, the chief building official gets involved. They have purview really over the BAR to deem a structure to deteriorate it to the point that it must be demolished for public safety reasons. So what are some solutions we're looking at now? Couple of things. We want to reactivate the Code Enforcement Board. Now, this board has been on the city ordinances for many years. It has not been activated since I've been dealing with livability since 2002, and even several years before that. The intent of that board was to deal with vacant structures, for one, and to deal with any issues that code enforcement officers were having with any type of code infraction. So we're going to look at this. We're looking at it now. We're probably, code enforcement is so across the board, if you will, from new construction to all kind of safety codes. So we're looking at renaming this board to the Livability Review Board to try to keep consistency with what our mission is. The other reason to activate this board is to deal with the proposed rental registration. It will also be an appeals board. for the rental registration process if when the landlords receive points against their license. And y'all heard a little bit about that the other night. This board will be made up of citizens, okay? And citizens that are knowledgeable with the aspects of construction, housing and community development, some neighborhood members, possibly attorneys, but we're still discussing this internal to try to figure out the best makeup for the board to handle that dual role of both vacants and the appeals process for rental registration. Also, we're going to be re-engaging the city's demolition and neglect task force. That has since fallen by the wayside with changeover with BAR staff, with architects who basically were overseeing that task force. We have already started engaging with the group. Now, this group will consist of planning and BAR staff, livability, the building official, fire marshal, housing and community development, and the Preservation Society or the Historic Foundation folks to try to give us insight. And the reason for this code enforcement board to deal with vacants is those, when it comes to a dead end, if you will, in the court process, we want to use this board for a mitigation kind of process or mediation with these individuals. We want to give them guidance to try to get their estates probated, to try to find avenues of resources when they don't have the money to take care of it. So we want to look at it as an education board as well that can facilitate with the expertise that are on that board to assist these family members or of these properties that just find it nearly impossible to deal with. So that is basically it. I will stop sharing and come back to life here. That's it in an overview, but does anybody have any questions?
All right, thank you, Dan, for that. If anyone have any questions, I can tell you one thing that I know of. Heirs property is rough. I think Councilman Appel can tell you about heirs property. Heirs property, you can have a million heirs and they don't get along half of the time. And that causes a whole lot of problem. And another problem is that a lot of them have never done a probate. They don't even know what probate is all about. They just, property is there, sitting there, probate have never been done, so nothing can be done with the property at that point, and they're fighting among themselves. You can't find the heirs because some is living in California, some is might living in Africa somewhere, or some is living someplace else. So that's a lot of problems you find with some of these houses that's in these communities. You know, somebody might still be paying the taxes on it, but that's about it. And no one is coming together to say, let's go and do what we need to do with these properties. So it's so hard with that. And even the property that Councilman Sacram, I think they saw on King Street, those 3 Freeman cottages that's on King Street, 3 or 4 cottages on King Street, those property was owned by this gentleman. He wanted to give it away, but the person had to move it themselves off the premises. But then the way it stands, the VAR and other entities said, you have to, if you move it, it has to stay in the city of Charleston. So a lot of people who wanted it wasn't going to move it in the city of Charleston. They was going to move it wherever they can find properties that, you know, they have already somewhere else. So that's why he couldn't get rid of the property there, and the property is sit there. So all he did was boarded the properties up to secure it that way. And that was part of what happened with those properties on King Street. Those are cottages that you see on King Street. So I don't know the solution that Danum is trying. It's a good thing what they're trying to do, and I hope it's successful. But it's going to be a lot, and I think Councilman Appel deal with a lot of this every day on some instances and some small instances, but it's not an easy task sometimes dealing with properties that way, even when you're talking about demolition for neglect and also with the properties there. If you have historical beams in the houses and all this, then they say you can't tear it down, you can't do this. So it's a lot of different hoops that they're trying to jump through even to eliminate the property. And that's why I told them one time I had to get a bulldozer and build all of them, tear all of them down. They said, oh, no, you can't do that, Councilman Mitchell. I said, well, you know, I would rather have a clear property next to me and someone keeping it clean than having the house falling down on me when you don't fix your houses up. But these are the things that we are running through in this particular city. So I hope with what they're talking about, that it might be a success and might help. Anybody else have any questions? All right. Oh, Councilman Sacre.
Councilmember Saccharin. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Dan, thank you for the PowerPoint, and thanks to the building folks, as well as our fire marshal and fire department for all the work that they're doing on this. You and I, Dan, know very well that I got involved in this on the personal side. So this is an issue that is critically important to me, and I don't want us to just, and I'm not going to suggest you would do this, just to report out here at CD and then it just die. So of the slides that you've shown, the one that I thought was the most important, particularly around, you know, just focusing on data, which is the contributing factor slide. So when I look at those contributing factors, could you isolate a few that we could focus and prioritize right now our efforts on? Is it BAR demo? Is it the Harris property? Which one is it? I mean, obviously we can't focus on everything, so I'm a big believer in prioritizing of which ones we can really focus our efforts on. I think the second part is, if you could just talk, Dan, a little bit about when the fire department or when the fire marshal deems something, I don't know the term, demoable, that's past BAR jurisdiction. What does that structure have to look like?
Well, not to speak for what they classify, but what I do know, they're concerned with structural integrity.
Okay.
If they deem that the house structure, I should say, is structurally unsound, then they deem that property as a danger for their firefighters to go in and inside. They're just telling them to fight the fire from the outside.
So if I might, Councilman, so yes, so when the fire marshal deems it a hazard, it's a hazard to enter. It's a hazard for it to have occupancy. Then the next step up, as Dan had in his slide, is the building official deems it an imminent hazard. At the point that the building official designates a building an imminent hazard, that's when it circumvents any other demolition provision, and he can order the building demolished. We just dealt with a case where the building, unfortunately, the contractor didn't secure it properly when trying to prepare some renovations, and now it's a potential imminent hazard to fall on a neighboring building. So the building official has declared it an imminent hazard. It circumvents the demolition provisions of our preservation ordinance. He issues me a letter that says that effect, and then he orders the property owner to immediately demo the building, or then the city takes action to resolve that imminent hazard.
So if I'm understanding, Mr. Summerfield, if the fire marshal comes in and deems that building X category, I'm not sure what that category is, but it's beyond habitable. It's got a the structural integrity is so deficient that it could be a life safety issue. Their judgment supersedes any other, supersedes BAR, supersedes the city.
No, so for the fire marshal, it supersedes for entry. So the fire marshal is making a judgment based on whether the building is safe for entry for their operations in case there is a fire. The fire marshal is not the one making the call about the structural integrity in terms of that it's an imminent hazard that can't be resolved. Nothing in an X designation by the fire marshal means that the building can't be rehabbed and brought back to productive use. That would be the thing that the building official, that's their determination. When they determine that it's an imminent hazard, that means there's no remedy at this point. The building has to come down for general life safety beyond just the building itself. The fire marshal is rating that building as no entry at that point for life safety professionals.
So I'm going to request, Chairman, if I would like to hear from our building folks, because I think this is a critical point. Because I think a lot of these structures that we see walking down the street from the general public's perception, they're clearly dilapidated. Clearly, no one lives in them. I guess I would like to better understand what makes a building, so structurally unsound that it's a life safety issue. And is that some discretionary? Is there a criteria? Is there a rubric that our building folks use that basically say if it's got this, this, and this, then it's in this category? Because there are some structures I see, particularly in my neighborhood, that the rehab on that would be so much and so much effort. I'm not sure it's worth it. So I guess I'm just trying to understand from a building perspective, building inspections, could they potentially come back next time for next CD and hear from them?
Either that, or we could have Mr. Granada contact you directly and chat about it if you like, but.
I don't want this issue to just,
way.
I feel like I appreciate Dan's presentation. My fear is that that I want to try to build some momentum on this, and I want to better understand the issue. So, and I'm sure Councilman Appel, Councilman Parker would like to hear that.
Yeah, fine.
That would be a problem. We can ask Council Ms. Johnson to make sure that we can get in touch with the building inspector and have them on the next CD committee meeting for a presentation. And also, when if it's still in existence, I remember being on council so long that even if the house looks like it's bad, but they figure the structure is still good, the homeowner or owner would have to, if they want to have this house torn down or demolished, they would have to hire their own engineer to do it. And that would have to go before the committee, and the committee's still going to make a decision if they feel that this is the case or not. Is that still correct?
Well, basically, you're in the right direction. So basically, there is a process to prove if the structure is not correct. So that would involve structural engineer reports and things of that nature. Then it would involve going to BAR staff and then up level to BAR, the whole BAR, to determine if this structural engineer report, fits their criteria, or can this house be rehabilitated back to its general, intended purpose. So yes, you're in the right line. If the homeowner wants to do that, they would have to pay for that themselves. All that would be on them. When the city takes action, obviously the city would be responsible for hiring those structural engineers. And it gets more heavily involved in that, even so with asbestos issues and environmental issues, and a lot of work goes into that.
Yeah, that's why I remember a couple of times I had be on council. I had some people that the house had looked so bad that they know what the cost factor has been so much for them to rehab it, and they wanted to say, well, it'd be best to tear it down and rebuild. But when they did, they had to go get the structural engineer. When they did the structural engineer, and when they checked, they said no, they can't do it. They said the structure is still good, so they were turned down. They couldn't tear the house down. So that's another thing. That's something else that we have to go through, because the cost factor for them to try to rehab the house, they couldn't afford it, and they know they couldn't afford it because the house had cost at that time almost $250,000 or $225,000 to rehab. So they figured with the house falling down and everything, they can go ahead and tear it down. And they said, no, you can't tear it down. So they had to hire their own structural engineer. And when they hired them, took it downtown, they still said, no, the structure is still good. The foundation is still good. You cannot tear it down. So that's another thing that, some of the people have to go through too. So it's not as easy as we think it is. It's very difficult sometimes. Any other questions? If not, we'll go on down to,
I think Councilmember Parker.
oh,
Chairman
I didn't see, I'm sorry, Ms.
That's
Parker.
okay. That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is really interesting. I honestly didn't expect this conversation to get this far into this because I actually took a lot of Mr. Summerfield's day today regarding an instance of this. So I know that y'all keep talking about BAR and you're talking about downtown a lot, but you know, I certainly spent a lot of time this morning talking about a situation on James Island. So this is very much a reality. And so when you say BAR, we still have all these acronyms, DRB, you know, that are, I mean, same thing, you know, and again, I mean, there's that gray area of if there's historic context, you know, if there's a historic connection, possibly, you know, who decides that? Is it DRB? I think Councilmember Waring also brought this up at council, correct? And that we were going to put on a future agenda regarding DRB. But I think this all goes hand in, you know, I really, and I was actually going to ask y'all after, you know, at the end of the meeting with any miscellaneous business, because I won't go deep into the situation on James Island, but we are essentially preventing someone from correcting the problem that you're speaking of, Councilmember Saccharin, right? You know, so I certainly, once again, we always talk about process, and this is definitely, you know, everything's new for me, but it's certainly seen over here on James Island as well. So I just want to make that clear. And that's why I certainly want to hear more from the department, you know, like you said, Councilmember Saccharin from the building department. This situation, unfortunately, they were just denied at DRB. So time is of the essence. I mean, I'm not going to be much help if there's a presentation in a month, but just wanted to put that out there. That I'm feeling that too over here. So thanks.
I think Councilman Saccharin, you had your hand up again?
No hand up.
Oh, Councilman Appel. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Councilmember Parker, you're exactly right. I mean, the DRB has demolition purview on most major thoroughfares, not just on James Island, but West Ashley, Johns Island, elsewhere. And, you know, it can create some challenging situations. Couple points, you know, it's long been my understanding under South Carolina law that the building inspector actually has the authority to override and short circuit the entire BAR process. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you that rarely, if ever, happens in the city of Charleston. Mm-hmm. We're extraordinarily deferential to our BAR. And I get it. I mean, that we're a historic city. When you're talking about, we want to go to the moon before we have to tear down a structure. I get it. I respect that 100%. But when you start getting north of Line Street and you start getting into some of these structures where maybe the historic value is not the same as, we're not South of Broad in the 1940s right now. I mean, it's just not the same. And I'm not trying to denigrate the structures north of Line Street. I mean, it's just a different animal. And maybe we just need to strike that balance a little bit differently in a very case-by-case determination. I mean, when you've got structures that are falling on other structures, when you've got structures that pose a life and health hazard to our firefighters, you know, it just becomes a different situation. And maybe one of the things we ought to be looking at is empowering our building, inspections department to, you know, get a little bit more aggressive. I'm not talking about just steamrolling the BAR on every single application that comes through. I'm just saying maybe instead of having the slider all the way over here, maybe we have it over here, you know, for the worst of the worst situations that we can proactively target. So I just wanted to kind of flag that. And I look forward to hearing more from the building inspector, maybe at an upcoming meeting along the lines of what Councilmember Saccharin mentioned. The other thing I would say is that, and I'm glad to have seen this in Mr. Riccio's presentation, is heirs property lies at the heart of a lot of these problems, like it does several other issues. And I'm going to plug my heirs property idea that I floated at CD a couple months ago. This is, modeled after what Philadelphia has done and some other cities have done. David Slade wrote a great story in the Post and Courier several months ago about this, where essentially we can, as the city, can help subsidize the title clearing process for heirs property owners who have been responsible, who've lived in the property, paid the taxes, they're part of the community, they want to live here. It's costly to clear your title, right? You got to hire a lawyer to do it. It costs us what, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 to build a new unit of affordable housing. Well, what if we could kick an eligible family member $5,000, $10,000 through the Centers for Heirs Property, to clear the title, put these folks in a position where they can actually own the property. If we need help to, subsidize the buyout of the other heirs or all these other things, we can talk about how all that works. But at least then you get the property in a position where it begins to make economic sense to do the sort of investments into the property that you need to have to rectify some of these more extreme conditions. So you don't have to get to what I was just talking about, where the building inspector comes in and says, look, we're just at the end of the line. There's just no other options here. This is a disaster. So I think there are some things we can do to get at this problem. I don't think it's going to take a complete paradigm or revolution in what we're doing, but I just think, being maybe a little bit more critical with some of our existing approaches, moving that slider over a little bit sometimes based upon, a unique situation or two, and just making sure that we chart the right path, because it's sad to, drive up King Street or elsewhere and see some of these dilapidated structures in the #1 city in the world. I mean, it's just a failure. It's just sad from an aesthetic perspective. It's sad from a, property ownership equity perspective. I mean, these are problems that we've got to be much more active in terms of solving. So I'm glad that this conversation's been brought forward. It's a very important one, and I look forward to continuing to talk about options. But let's think about those heirs property grants and ways we can leverage our limited affordable housing funds to reach the goals that we're trying to reach. I mean, if we can help keep somebody in their property for $10,000, $15,000 versus building a new unit for $500, you start getting into some good situations there. And, oh, by the way, fixing a dilapidated structure through the process. I mean, it's a win-win kind of dynamic here. So those are my thoughts. I appreciate the opportunity to give a comment. Thank you.
All right. This is going to be an ongoing conversation. I'll say that. So it's not going to stop here. Any other questions? We'll take that as information and we'll move on. We'll bring it back when the building inspector comes at the next meeting, CD meeting. And then we'll have more questions, so you can write your questions down and be ready for them when they come. So we'll move on to item number 3, which is the City of Charleston Department of Planning, Preservation and Sustainability. Board of Architectural Review, north of Line Street. Demo policy. All this is relating to one another. I think this would be, who is presenting this? Mr. Robert Summerfield?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So similar to Dan, I'm going to echo and thank Councilman Saccharin. While this issue has been something that's actually been on the department's to-do list to take a hard look at things like this, honestly, since I got here a little over a year and a half ago, or about a year and a half ago now, it's been something that's obviously the councilman's been passionate about, and he's been continuing to light a fire under our feet here to continue to press it forward. So I want to thank him for that. With permission, Councilman, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see this. So what I wanted to do today was, and hopefully this provides a little bit of, assurance to the committee and just the council members at large that we are hearing everything y'all are saying, and we are working very diligently with our boards, our commissions, and the community, and the different stakeholder groups on how we can address these things. So what you see in front of you is just kind of a comparative table of adjustments that we've made to the proposed policy based on conversations that were held as a part of the CD committee back in May. We've been working very diligently on updating the policy based on some of those things that were said. A couple of things I want to point out specifically, that in addition to the categories that were considered least responsive to the historic district or non-contributing to the historic district, we've actually took a really close look at the elements of those categorizations, and we've increased the number of categories that are in the group that get the staff review, that have a greater opportunity because of the lesser threshold, if you would, for possible alternatives for replacements for things like windows and roof elements and things of that nature, such that, and I have a map in a minute I'm going to show you, the vast majority of the properties in what we're now calling Group 2 in this north of line area will be accommodated under the proposed policy for staff level review of those replacement elements, provided that they're meeting that criteria. Another big one that we heard from the committee, and we've heard since then, and it's really never been a part, just because it's sometimes difficult to wrap your hands around this particular piece, is how do we address the difference? Because one of the things that's being very clear is that there's a healthy portion of properties north of line that have been bought by investors and are being attempted for flips and things like that. But there's also a pretty significant element that is owned in that group that you all have been talking about now for a little while, the heirs properties or legacy property owners, folks who've held their home. Councilman Mitchell, you've talked about this quite a bit, about folks who've lived in their home 30, 40 years. And, to keep the house in an exact historic context as it's been, they just financially don't have the resources to do that. And so what we've done with the policies, we've also introduced the ability to provide greater flexibility for these legacy homeowners or these heirs properties, so that, if you are one of these long-term property owners, or you are an owner with a household income less than the 80% AMI, and your property is not on the National Register, which is a whole different ball of wax, then even if you're in Group 1, you're going to get moved to Group 2 for purposes of evaluating your project, for consideration of the staff review, and the additional flexibility in terms of those materials. We've also taken a closer look in the policy where, a big part of the conversation has been more on, and I think this is maybe something, we in the profession have not done the best job of clarifying, that historic preservation is not just the building. This is our built history. This is what it has meant for us as a community, as a people. These aren't just buildings and wood and what have you. These are actually the experiences that have gone into this. So the other element of the policy is we try to place a better emphasis, not just on the historic nature from the structure itself is 50 years old or what have you, but also the cultural context and the cultural significance of the district and the building and what have you. So these are kind of, again, just to really recap, because I know Mr. Chairman and others have another committee meeting here at 5. So I want to not take an overabundance of time on this. But again, this table kind of just really reflects where the policy has been responsive, I think, to what we've heard from the committee previously and what we've heard in subsequent conversations with council members. We took it to the next step. So we really wanted to take a look, okay, we put all this on paper, but what does it mean? So this next table that I'm showing you, and again, hopefully this is coming through, shows you where we had one of our team members actually go back and take real world examples and apply the proposed policy to those properties and see what, if anything, would change. And in each of these cases, there was, because of the limited context that the board is able to look at with some of these demolition things, absent a policy change, each of these properties had made a request. Most of these were category 4, although we did have a category 3 property that were denied by the board for the proposed change that they were looking for. Under the policy and under the applicability, not only would they be able to move forward with their project with the change in policy, but they'd be able to move forward with their project with a staff review and not require the formal board review and public hearing element of that. So we think we've done a really good job, again, balancing need, community need, and the things that we've heard from the council members and portions of our community with trying to, and this kind of goes back to Councilman Pell has mentioned this before, this, we have some competing value statements here in the city. And so this policy change, I believe, is a really good attempt to balance, not compromise, but balance those competing values that we have towards affordability, towards equity, while also continuing to preserve our built heritage and our built environment in a way that keeps these structures around and visible and accessible to the community 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, not just the folks who got to enjoy and experience those buildings. And then finally on this topic, I just want to show you the map so you can see the impact of this policy change. So on the map, you'll see, so all the red is group 1. These are the properties that have the highest element of contributing factors to the historic neighborhoods and historic districts. And so those are in the group 1. Those still do have a higher threshold, if you would, on their review. But see the sea of blue, these are all the properties that, again, would fall now into this group 2. And even some of these group 1s, again, if they meet that legacy property owner or that AMI criteria, even some of these reds would then turn blue, if you would, for purposes of the policy change evaluation. So this is what we've been working on. This has been a process. Councilman Saccharin, as you know, this has been something we've been working on. And at times it's felt like we should have had this done by now. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But it's been a process. We've been working very closely with community members and stakeholders on this. But I believe in absence of some substantial objection this afternoon, that we are in a place where we can put this. I currently have the team. This will be formally presented as up for adoption to the both the BAR large and the BAR small at their meetings next week. So this will be on their agenda for them to adopt this policy. Per your preservation ordinance, the BAR, in addition to the ordinance itself, can adopt policies to help achieve the goals and objectives of the city council, the preservation ordinance, and our comprehensive plan. And so this, I believe, like I said, is a good policy for them to adopt. We have been working with them as well. So the board have been involved in this process in a advisory capacity. And so again, we are presenting, our BAR staff will be presenting this policy formally at both boards next week. My hope is that they will have a really good discussion and that they will adopt them next week. If not, they may carry that conversation over for another meeting into September. But that is where we're at right now, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions. I also have on the line a couple staff members who, if for whatever reason I can't answer, they should be able to help. Thank you, Councilman.
Do we have any questions? I don't see any hands up. I don't want to miss anyone. Oh, Councilmember Parker, then Councilmember Sacre.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I know we're a little late in the game, but like I was just saying, so BAR and DRB, these are two different, this policy change is only going to be for BAR. We're not looking at anything with DRB, even though they kind of hold some of the same weight, because we're focusing obviously more on downtown, correct, Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, but with that in mind, Councilwoman, so there is a slight difference in the jurisdiction on the demo. So yeah, so this North Line is a little bit more of an involved level of protection and scrutiny given under the BAR preservation ordinance. The DRB, in the context of the conversation we were having this morning, really, it doesn't have this fine detail. However, that said, I don't believe that there is any reason why we wouldn't, after we get through this effort with the BAR, look at similar appropriate context provisions to have further conversation with the DRB as well, going into the future.
Okay, great. I appreciate it. And if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, I would make that similar request, since we're on this, since the system is kind of rolling.
Yeah, you would like to have at the next meeting?
Whatever, Mr. Summerfield. I mean, like you said, it's a little late in the game with this process right now with the BAR, but I mean, I think since we're headed in that direction, like I was just saying, we have similar, this isn't just a BAR. Right. We have possible, dilapidated residences all over the city, and that whatever historic significance may or may not lie in that property. I mean, we have this, it's the same. So we have similar instances with the DRB, right?
Right.
So yes, I would just request, like Mr. Summerfield said, that maybe moving ahead, moving along, and Mr. Councilmember Waring said that he was going to bring some DRB issues to the next committee meeting. So if it is,
we'll report out on a time frame for adopting this concept, this policy that we're working on for the BAR into a DRB framework as well.
Okay, I just wanted to keep that on, Mr. Chair, just
sure,
kind of in that. Okay, thank you.
That's fine. That's fine. So we need to get all the information we possibly can so we can be aware of it and we can be able to explain to our constituents out there.
Okay, thanks.
And because I remember even next door to me, I have a lady, she's a senior citizen, about 80-something years old, and she have a tin roof. And she cannot replace it with anything else but a tin roof, and she's not going to be able to afford it. And see, I had tin roof one time, but mine went back in 1989 when Hugo came through and messed it up. But I went back with shingles at the time because the BAR wasn't in this area during that time. Otherwise, if the BAR had been in this area at the time, I would not have been able to do it. So I just put another shingle roof on my house last year, 30-year architectural shingle, but she is there next door and she cannot do it. She would have to go back and replace it back with the tin roof. Well, and I know she can't afford it right now.
And Mr. Chairman, so with this policy, that actually may no longer be as dire of a situation. So if you want to pass that information on to us, I can have Ms. Parrish, our city architect, or one of her team members potentially reach out and verify if this policy may provide that neighbor some additional relief that may help her address her roof issue. Did I lose you, Councilman?
I think our chairman is frozen.
He's frozen.
But I'm vice chair, so I'm going to take over. It's a coup, Mitch. I do have a question, though, Mr. Sump. Go ahead, Mayor. I know you were going to ask a question, but go ahead. I'll defer to you.
I'm just relevant to this discussion. Want to remind everyone that DRB only applies to those major thoroughfares, and not like to neighborhoods at large like it does on the peninsula. And in fact, the reverse situation can happen West Ashley, James Island, other parts of the city off the peninsula. This morning at my coffee with the mayor, two ladies came by, and there's no jurisdiction in this West Ashley neighborhood for the city to deny a demolition. The owner just wants to tear down the house and build something else. Well, they would love to see the house remain. It's about an 80-year-old house and adds a lot of character to the neighborhood, and it's structurally sound, and they would like to see it remain, but we can't tell them no. So there are now some other areas and neighborhoods who would like to have the city be more proactive. So the shoe is on the other foot there. I'm sorry, I just thought I'd interject that.
Thank you, Mayor. Now that I'm not sure if Mitch is back, but I do have a question, but I'm going to hold off. Councilman Gregory, you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. My question is, have we done a value comparison? And by that, what I mean is using different materials, okay? In comparison to what it was, does that detract from the value of the property?
So yes, Councilman, part of the conversation at least was, what is the material exchange, if you would, from the historic element to what some of the level of replacement materials are. And so it's not a pure economic thing, but it is an anecdotal analysis where we've looked at properties that have used, and again, it's not my intent to throw shade on any particular building material in case anyone has a investment in a vinyl siding company or anything like that. But you're absolutely correct. There are different materials. Substituting those for historic materials does play a part in evaluating the house, not just from a pure financial step, but also potentially impacting its designation as historic, and therefore potentially disrupting that designation of a historic district or neighborhood, which we do have actual data that shows that historic districts and historic neighborhoods retain value during times of recession. 2008 recession, if you look nationwide, historic districts tended to maintain value where many other neighborhoods went through the floor, if it would. Now all those have thankfully came back, but it can have that impact as well.
The reason why I raised the question is that I think that people need to move forward and be informed. Okay, right. That if I deviate from this and I go to something totally different, that could affect value, not just on their property, but it could affect the value in an entire neighborhood, particularly if it's a historic district in particular.
Yes, sir.
It's just a point I wanted to be a part of the discussion.
Thank you, Dudley, or Councilman Gregory. I'm not sure if Mitch is back, but my questions and comments were really just, I just want to say I appreciate all the work Robert and Tori and Julia, as well as Cash and Brian and Sam, if you're still on. I appreciate the conversations. It's been tremendously helpful. It has been a long process, Mr. Summerfield, but I'm not in a rush. I want to get it right. And I feel like when we did this in 2017, we probably should have taken a deeper dive on some of this, and just to get something passed, we passed it. And if it's going to take another month, then so be it. My point is, I do see that the process is streamlined. That's wonderful. More is given to the staff in terms of making those decisions. So that's a good thing. I see that there's increased flexibility around materials, and I think you all are going to do a great job of streamlining the process on the front end, making sure that folks are aware of the process. But when I still look at that diagram that you showed, my ultimate question is there an affordability to this still? So if I'm a homeowner and I still have to go to BAR, and I still have to, or to staff, and I'm still left with the conundrum of having to replace with a very expensive material, and I'm not talking about vinyl windows. So Dudley, I get your point that, we could replace something that could devalue the home. I'm talking practical replacements, for example, a wood window. I want to make sure that this policy or the new changes still allow some flexibility and give folks an affordable option. I'm not seeing that, Mr. Summerfield. And again, Ms. Parrish just sent me that today, so I'm going to dig a little bit deeper tonight and read it this week. But I guess my point is I still haven't seen that in there. So if you're going from category 3 to category 2 or category 2 to category 3, does that in itself create an additional, reduce the additional economic burden? I'm still stuck on that.
Yeah, so that's the intent. I mean, we'll need to, like with everything, we'll need to see, and I think you've mentioned this in the past, we'll need to see the policy in action, but we believe from the tests that we ran that yes, that does create opportunities for using less expensive materials than you previously would have been required to use, making it arguably more affordable. Now, again, I guess in all transparency and honesty to make it clear, while we are looking at that anecdotally in the ultimate evaluation, financial wherewithal is not a part of, to demo or not to I mean, that's financial hardships traditionally are not something that you can make a deciding factor on, which I know is not necessarily what you're asking. I'm just making sure that we're all clear on that piece of it. But yes, the part of this is to create greater flexibility in the types of materials that can be used as replacement or repair material. And by virtue of having that greater flexibility and more choices in that material, creating opportunity for folks to maybe find something that's at a more affordable price point for them.
Okay, I'm going to spend some more time digging into this and certainly look at some of the examples that you all have cited. But I do want to say thank you for all the work and the staff's work on this. It's been a long time. And like I said, if it takes another month or two to get it right, I'm going to stick with it. So thank you all. Councilman Appel.
Thank you, Vice Chair Zachary. I appreciate it. So I've had an opportunity to look over these proposals, and I definitely think that it's progress. I mean, you're essentially providing more clarity. You're distinguishing between different categories of structures, and you're putting more at the staff level. That all being said, this is not a paradigm change, Jason. This is a tweak of an existing framework that was put into place in 2017, not in 1917. This is a very new policy that the city has put into place. And what I'm hearing from your comments is more of a questioning of the underlying concepts and philosophy behind this whole, approach to begin with. And I think that's an interesting discussion to have. But certainly, I think this is an improvement. I think we're moving in the right direction, but there's no question, just to be clear, that any of this disproportionately and adversely impacts lower socioeconomic folks that are subject to these regulations. If you're a hedge fund manager who lives in Hampton Park Terrace, none of this is a problem to you. You're going to hire LS3P, you're going to hire the top lawyers, you're going to know all of us, you're going to know the people on the BAR, and you're going to sail through this process, whether we change the rules or we don't. Oh, by the way, your house is going to look great because you're super wealthy and you want your house to look great. The issue here is not that those types of folks. Those are the types of folks who live in my district, right? So Old Windermere, South Windermere, the Crescent. You never hear about horrific architecture and in these neighborhoods, with maybe some small exceptions. It's because
I was going to say, Councilman, this past week has led to a few of those.
Well, I know that someone's trying someone's trying to demo 8 Stalker, and that's what the mayor's talking about. That's an old Windermere, and we don't have demolition purview in this part of the area. You know, and that's something we're going to be talking about in my district. So the mayor's absolutely right. While we're talking about peeling some of this stuff back on the Upper Peninsula, we're talking about putting it on over in my district, and it's going to be a very interesting, you know, conversation to have about that. But what I would say that's different about my district is, and it's a sad situation, all the neighborhoods I represent may be, you know, all the historic neighborhoods I represent, maybe with a minor exception here or there, all had racial restrictive covenants on them when they were developed. They were developed for the purpose of not having lower socioeconomic, you know, folks and African Americans. So folks in my district can absorb a lot of this stuff much, much better. We're much more like the hedge fund guy that's living by, you know, Hampton Park Terrace that has no problem with any of this. What makes north of Line Street an issue, and the reason I think you're having these issues and constituents bringing these matters forward, is that there's a lot more diversity on a north of Line, right? And so these rules land a lot differently depending on who they're being applied to. And to Robert's point, you know, when you're trying to get you know, a zoning variance, you're not supposed to look at economic and financial hardship, which is kind of a crazy situation if you actually think about why that's the case and why that was put into the law in the first place. But putting that aside for a second, you know, I certainly think that if we're going to move forward with these tweaks, there needs to be a massive public outreach and communication effort, because I think a lot of folks, and I'll defer to the folks that represent this area north of Line, but I think there's a lot of folks that just walk around just resigned to the fact that there's just no way you're ever getting through any of these processes with the city. Yeah, it's just too complicated, too expensive, too unpredictable, and we're just not going to even try it. So if we're going to you know, make these improvements, which I think are it's better than where we are, you know, we need to make sure people know about that so they can actually avail themselves of it, because it's still a very complicated dynamic, even if some of the friction's been taken out of the process with some of these tweaks. So it's a very interesting discussion, very important discussion. I mean, I'm going to be facing it in my district this fall, and I look forward to that. But you know, I think we're heading in the right direction, but there may be the need for more work as well, to your point, Councilman Sacker.
And if I might, Mr. Chairman, just real quick, Councilman, I do want to assure you that, yes, the next step after getting the policy adopted is to do a campaign of communication with the area north of Line, so that folks who are in that situation that you just described, who have kind of thrown their hands up because they don't feel like, you know, they have an option under the current policies or rules for whatever reason, know that there has been a shift, that there is some an opportunity to have their, I mean, again, like I showed on the example, that's 5 situations where, you know, based on the way things are currently written, they were denied, but those can be reevaluated because now we believe they would have been eligible to have to be approved. So 100% that is the direction that we would be going as soon as we get this policy in place.
Not sure, Mitch, if you're on, but Councilman Gregory, go ahead. Are you on?
Yeah, Councilman Appel, you said it much more eloquently than I did in terms of the unintended consequences that we really need to consider, because of course there were those covenants, okay, and some of them may even still be on the books if we just don't even know about in some of these developments. But that was the point that I was attempting to make when I was talking about the economic consequences of the actions. And I think that that is something that we really, really need to hone in on. And I think that the way you articulated it is much better than the way I have. And I really appreciate it when you talk about gentrification and covenants on race and what that has done in terms of wealth denial, not wealth creation. So I think that we really need to be very careful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Gregory. Councilman Mitchell, you want me to handle the rest of this, or are you good? I think you said go ahead. I can read lips. Last couple comments, I guess, Mr. Summerfield, are on my end, and if anyone else has anything, we can move on quickly to the last part of the meeting. Again, if this takes some time to continue, I want to make sure that gets done. I think Ross and Councilman Appel articulated, my concerns. Those have been my concerns the whole time. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I was asking for practical changes, and maybe that's not what we need. I'm just going to say it. It might be some more radical changes that we need. This is not an old policy. It came in 2017. I want to be able to make the case to my neighbors that come to me and say, I can't afford to do X, Y, and Z. That this policy is going to help them. Right now, all I see is on the basic, and I haven't read it all fully. I want to make sure that, preface that I haven't read what Tori sent to me. I want to make sure that it's not just being approved for BAR. That wasn't the point of this. The point of this wasn't making sure that people get approval. The point was that they get approved and they have a full list and menu of options that are affordable for them. That was the goal of this. So with that, we can head on to the next agenda item. I don't have the agenda in front of me, but I believe it was the Height District, Mr. Summerfield.
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair. So yeah, so the last item was just a general update to the CD committee on a couple height district related ordinances or amendments that we're working on. Both actually were encapsulated in the ordinance amendment that was on City Council on Tuesday for first read. The first one, and I think a lot of folks took a look at that, our first element of that was some amendments that we are proposing. We've been working for almost 9 months now, I think, on addressing an ongoing concern related to the effectiveness of our two-prong element. The effectiveness of the allowance for a merit finding by the BAR to allow an additional story of height, but also our rezoning for height, whether or not we are including a sufficient analysis, if you would, of the reason for that height change and the consideration that the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council should be considering for approving a rezone for height change. So in that ordinance, there's two elements to it. The first element removes the merit allowance. We've heard, and as I said, we've been working on this amendment for, it feels like about 9 months. It may be somewhere between 6 and 9 months, actually. But we have met with architects. We've met with members of the BAR boards, architects who have successfully received merit in their projects, as well as architects whose projects seemed as if they might have had an interest in merit, but did not pursue merit. And based on those conversations, that's why we proposed that kind of ultimate case of bringing forth the amendment that would eliminate the option for merit as a part of the amendment. Now, in the work that we did, we do have some options. So it's not as if there's not some consideration for something less than a full removal of merit. And so we're going to be heard from council members loud and clear leading up to Tuesday night's meeting. Once everyone was aware that this amendment was on there, we're going to be talking more about some of those other options so that there is some opportunity for some compare and contrast conversations. We don't think that and while to have merit or not to have merit may have some degree of I don't want to say controversy, but discussion, need for dialogue. I'm hopeful that most everyone is on board with the idea of providing some objective criteria to evaluate a rezone for height. Additionally, because we're always looking in the planning department to support Gianna and her team in trying to incentivize affordable housing. You know, we've actually, in this amendment, we proposed to allow for, if you're an affordable housing project, you can actually request, well, normally you may only request a height increase to one height district. If you're an affordable housing project, you can request to go up 2 height districts. So again, that provides an opportunity for additional height, therefore arguably additional density there. So that's in general, that portion of the amendment. Mr. Vice Chair, I see Councilman Gregory has his hands up, but we want to go to that before I go into the other height change that we're proposing. That's kind of different than the merit conversation.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, this one is causing lots of calls to me from folks south of Broad and north of Broad. West Side folks, they're very concerned. Number one, and you correct me if I'm wrong, they think that the issue is serious enough that it should have some type of public hearing. They also, what I'm getting is that they think that the city is trying to pull a fast one. And, you know, of course, I know differently, but just giving you some of the sense of the kinds of calls that I've been getting on this particular issue. I don't know whether or not it's something that would require, or we can have a public hearing so that we can actually hear the voices of the community and their concerns. But I am getting a lot of pushback from various neighborhoods, and not just those that are in my district.
So Councilman, you're absolutely correct. That it was always intended that there would be public hearings on this. It was no attempt to do a fast one. The reason the process became a little wonky was because of the nature of the change. It was suggested that we give it to council for first read to establish the pending ordinance doctrine, and then take it back to planning commission. They would hold their public hearing just like normal, move it to city council for a public hearing, bring it to CD committee for a further committee discussion, and then work out any amendments there before bringing a final version to council for council consideration on.
But would first reading put it into effect?
No.
Okay.
No. It just.
I think it does.
Well, it puts, if anything, it puts kind of a stay on any applications until it's resolved. So it doesn't put it into effect, but yes, I mean, it does, yes.
I think that's a distinction without a difference. But, you know, I really think that is an issue that we've got to deal with, because I'm getting a lot of pushback.
Well, we did, if I may interject, we did not give it first reading.
No.
So,
I know we didn't.
We can proceed now and have the public hearings as planned, and they can come forward and tell us all of their objections. I look forward to hearing them.
Okay, I know we didn't give it first reading. I'm just making it clear that if we had, it would put it into effect.
It would temporarily.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
all right. I
Yeah.
just want to make sure we're clear. Thank you.
Yeah, it would prevent my team from accepting applications that would be contrary to what, yes. So in effect, you're absolutely right, Councilman. So at any rate, so the idea right now is that this would be on the September Planning Commission meeting for them to hold their public hearing on it, hear any objections at that time related to it, and then it would come forward September, October for council and CD committee hearing and discussion. So unless there's any and in the meantime, between now and the Planning Commission, my team will also be doing some more public facing outreach. Before, we've done more focus groups, discussions, invitation type things as we were trying to better understand what we were getting in terms of the concern. But my commitment here, which was always the original plan, would be that we would be having more general invitation to hear from folks. To be honest, Councilman, I would really like to really like to hear from those folks that are in the areas that you were describing that are objecting, because we've heard from quite a few in that area.
I'll share a couple of numbers with you, okay?
Appreciate it.
All
Appreciate
right.
it. So anyway, that's the plan with that. I just want to make sure everybody here is up to speed with that and make sure there were no objections to that process.
Thank you, Mr. Summerfield. Is there any objections, Councilman Appel?
Well, so I'm still not 100% clear what's being proposed. I understand what the objections are. I understand that the historic groups have very clearly and eloquently articulated that from their perspective, they believe that this additional story that's being provided by the BAR pursuant to the ordinance the council adopted in 2017, this was all part of that BAR overhaul post Jasper, that there's some problems in that process. But what are we proposing? Taking that away from the BAR, making it more objective, putting the power in the hands of council? You know, there wasn't, there's not an ordinance that's been prepared as far as I know.
No, there's an ordinance.
Well, I haven't seen it. It's not on our agenda.
There's an ordinance
It was in Tuesday night's agenda.
in the packet.
Okay. Got it. Well,
So could I give an example the way I understand it? Like right now, if you're, for example, got a zoning height allowance for 4 stories, you can go to city council and get approval to go up 1 level to 5 stories. Isn't that right, Robert?
Correct, sir. That would be the height rezoning.
And in addition to that, you can get a bonus floor from the BAR for architectural merit. So really, if you're in 4, you have the possibility of going to 6. This amendment would only allow the additional floor to be approved by city council by a zoning change, and would basically remove the ability of the BAR to give you an extra floor for architectural merit. Is that the nutshell of it?
Correct, sir. So that's as it's currently written. Yes, that would be what would happen. Again, so that's the most, Councilman, to use your continuum spectrum. So that's our most extreme option that came out of the discussion. And I would obviously we've heard from the preservation groups, but I guess I would want to make sure that it's only fair to them to also put on the record that this is not exclusive to those preservation groups. Again, we did a lot of conversations, particularly with architects who have been through the process for merit, who chose not to go through the process for merit, who received merit, who hadn't received merit, as well as architects who sit on our BAR, and had conversations with all of them just about that function. And so while clearly the Preservation Society and Historic Charleston Foundation have a perspective, they are not alone in their concern about how merit has ended up being used. In some cases, it's been argued abused. And the lack of clarity around what constitutes merit, I think, has probably been one of our biggest issues or concerns, if you would, around that. And I know, Councilman, we've got to go because Hark's about to begin, and I think we'll lose quorum here because of the folks that've got to do that. So anyway, we are going to start the public process. We will be at Planning Commission for a public hearing next week. We will be talking about other options that could be considered if elimination of merit is not something that everyone is on board with, because there were some other options that we considered in the evaluation, if you would. I did have one other thing, though, real quick, I wanted to go through before we cut off, if I could.
Can I say something real quick before y'all go any further? I just wanted to see, I don't believe y'all approved the minutes from the last meeting, and I just want to make sure that is done before any of you all leave this meeting.
I think we did that
I think Brittany,
We
I think
did
they
it.
did do that.
at the beginning.
Okay,
We did it at the
Patrick
beginning.
did not have that notated, so can you tell me who approved it so I can make note of it for him?
I made them,
Motion?
Appel and Saccharin.
right, Appel and Saccharin.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I'll make note of it. Thank you.
Welcome.
And then finally, real quick, there was because of an element that came forward to Planning Commission in July, we had actually, because we were trying to expedite getting it on the books, we had actually tucked it into the draft ordinance that was presented or was to be presented at City Council on Tuesday. This is about, so we have allowances for folks that are raising an existing structure to have some height allowance when they're in these flood zones. But for whatever reason, we weren't clear, or we hadn't provided for new buildings. So if you're doing a new house, for whatever reason, we didn't provide the ability for you to have the some allowance for that raising of that structure above floodplain and finished floor height. So I highlight this. This is going to go to Planning Commission in September as a separate ordinance. I don't want, this one is a quick fix that I think is a good win for that infill development that we all want to see more of, particularly in downtown, where I think the question came up specifically. So we're going to pull this one out of the current height amendment ordinance and just bring it forward as a separate on a separate process, because I would like to try to get this fix adopted as soon as possible, because I believe this will help a couple different projects that are currently trying to get a height zone change, when in reality, I think they just need to be given an allowance for the fact that they're in a flood area, and that will help resolve them so they don't need to go through a full rezoning process.
We may need to talk with the West Side Neighborhood Association.
Okay.
Because they're very fearful of this one as well. So
Okay.
I think, perhaps at some point we need to come to the meeting and explain it to them.
Okay.
I'm a West Side person, and some of the buildings that are infill are towering over many of the existing. And there is concern on the West Side that the total flavor of that area is being changed as a result of some of our zoning requirements. And this one in particular, they're quite curious. And I think we need to talk to that neighborhood association and explain to them what's going on.
Sure, absolutely, Councilman. Happy to do that. I would just for your benefit, this is actually hopefully in a response to give again a good in-between space, so that we don't give full story increase to accommodate for a flood issue, when really maybe only a few feet are necessary to accommodate that flood issue. So is to provide those property owners and developers with some greater leeway than they currently have, without going to approving a full story increase, where that may not be the intention, because of that exact issue, that will grossly change the context of that neighborhood.
Okay.
That neighborhood or others.
Thank you.
This
Yes,
is
sir.
a help.
Yes. On both sides of that conversation. And with that, Mr. Vice Chair, I'm done unless anyone has any other questions for me.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
thank you.
Chairman.
Sorry for so much time.
No, that's okay. We've got a few more minutes left. I've got to start harking a couple minutes.
I got to start too.
Is there any
I
more?
do too.
Is there any more discussion?
No,
Okay. Is there anything else to come before the community development?
the mayor has his hand up.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to note and congratulate Councilmember Gregory, because whatever change we made in his microphone to my ear has eliminated the feedback. It worked.
But guess who's getting the feedback now? I am, from all of you.
Oh, well.
But I appreciate it, Mayor. Thank you.
If there's no more business to come before this committee, I move to adjourn. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second. Thank you, Councilman. Yeah.
You're welcome. It's
Thank you,
moved.
co-chair.
You're welcome. It's moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? No nays. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.